Hi, I'm Lucas. And on the day I buried my mother, I realized grief doesn't just expose who we are. It reveals who others have always been. It was drizzling that morning. Not the kind of rain that pours. It just lingered, like sadness that refused to pass. I stood beneath a gray sky, my suit clinging to my skin, clutching the folded obituary in my hands like it could somehow keep me steady. My mother, Ruth, was gone. And with her, the only real softness I'd ever known. People came up to offer condolences. My wife, Amanda, stayed close but quiet. Her family was there too, more out of obligation than care. They never really liked my mom. She was too direct, too emotional, too much of a reminder that not everyone wears masks. After the burial, we moved to a small hall nearby for the reception. The kind where the food sits untouched and the air is heavier than silence. I stood near the front, trying to thank people as they filtered in. But when I started talking about my mom, what she meant to me, how she raised me after my father died when I was 8, my voice cracked. I choked up, and I cried. Not loud, not dramatic. Just tears running quietly down my face. That's when he said it. From the other end of the room, my father-in-law, Martin, lifted his glass, scoffed, and said, "Real men don't cry. They handle business." It was loud enough for everyone around to hear. A few chuckled. Most looked away. Amanda didn't say a word. I stood there, stunned. A part of me wanted to believe I'd misheard. But I didn't. He was looking straight at me, smirking, like he'd just taught me a lesson. Martin had always been that kind of man. The pull-yourself-up-by-the-bootstraps type. The emotion is weakness type. His version of love came wrapped in judgment. Amanda once told me that when she was little and scraped her knee, he told her to stop crying and go mow the lawn. I shouldn't have expected more. But in that moment I did. Maybe because I'd just lost the one person who always let me feel. Excused myself, went into the hallway, and stared at my reflection in a framed photo on the wall. I didn't recognize the man looking back. He looked cracked. Then something snapped. I remembered the envelope. The one I found weeks ago, shoved into a folder of Amanda's old mail. It was addressed to Martin. I'd opened it by accident, at least that's what I told myself. It was a love letter, from someone named Clarissa. It mentioned nights at a cabin, bank withdrawals, promises of divorce. I hadn't said anything at the time. It wasn't my business, I thought. It wasn't my place. But today, he'd made it personal. I walked back into the room, calmer than I should have been. People were still milling around, talking about how wonderful my mother was. Martin stood in the corner, laughing with a bourbon in hand like he was at a wedding, not a funeral. I picked up a glass, clinked it with a fork. The room quieted. I looked straight at him. "To Martin," I said, lifting the glass. "A man who thinks grief is weakness, and who, just like my mother taught me, reminds us that real strength, real honor, is never loud." He raised his brow, smirked again, and I smiled back, because I already knew. I wasn't done yet. Tomorrow, at his retirement toast, I'd be reading Clarissa's letter in front of his entire family, board members, and that tight circle of friends he liked to call his empire, and he'd learn that some men cry, others destroy with a smile. To understand why Martin's words cut so deep that day, you'd have to understand what kind of man he was, and how I'd spent years biting my tongue around him. Martin Ramsey didn't just believe he was the head of his family. He thought he was the standard every man should measure himself against. Former military, owned 3 businesses, ran his household like a boardroom. You spoke when spoken to, and you didn't show emotion unless it was pride, anger, or a handshake after a win. When Amanda and I first started dating, I remember how hard I tried to earn his respect. I wasn't flashy or aggressive. I worked in nonprofit strategy, loved jazz, and actually believed listening mattered more than speaking. That made me, in his eyes, soft. I still remember the first time I visited their house. Martin didn't shake my hand. He sized me up like I was some stray mutt his daughter had dragged home. At dinner, he said, "So what's your real job, son?" I explained what I did. He laughed and muttered, "So basically, you beg rich people for charity." Amanda laughed. Too, but not because it was funny. More like survival. I knew then that Martin wasn't going to respect me. Not really. But Amanda was worth it. She was different from him. Warm, strong, deeply thoughtful. And I figured I'd never have to get too close to Martin anyway. But life had other plans. We got married. And over time, Martin inserted himself more and more into our lives. Subtle comments at holidays. Passive-aggressive jabs when I'd mention travel plans or career goals. Every Thanksgiving felt like a business dinner where he held court and I sat at the kids' table. And Amanda? She never stood up to him. At first I thought she didn't notice. But over the years I started to realize she did notice. She just didn't want to be the daughter who disappointed her father. It became the quiet tension of our marriage. Her loyalty pulled in two directions. Mine pulled only toward her. But the more he talked, the smaller I became in my own home. When we bought our house, he joked about how he'd spot us when we couldn't keep up. When I got promoted, he said, "That's cute. Amanda could do better." I swallowed it. Every time. I told myself I was keeping the peace. That emotional maturity meant rising above. That being the bigger man meant saying nothing at all. But when my mom got sick, I watched Martin grow more distant, more annoyed with my absence from family functions. Amanda told him I was caring for my mother full time. He shrugged and said, "It's what women do. Men don't babysit their parents." He said it in front of me, and Amanda didn't flinch. It chipped something inside me that day. I was her husband, and yet I felt like a guest in her family. A tolerated outsider who was too emotional, too soft, too invisible. So when he stood up at my mother's funeral and reduced her life, and my grief, to a throwaway line about real men, it wasn't just disrespectful. It was the final confirmation of what I had always feared. Martin didn't think I was a man at all. But I was done holding my tongue. Because in the back of my drawer was a letter written in lipstick on hotel stationery. A letter signed, "Forever yours, Clarissa." And Martin may not respect tears, but he'd have to respect silence breaking. The letter came into my life by accident. At least that's what I told myself for a while. But now, I think some part of me was always meant to find it. It was 3 weeks before the funeral. My mother was still in hospice then, and I had taken a week off to stay with her. One evening I went home to grab some paperwork. Amanda was at work. On the counter sat a stack of unopened mail. Most of it was junk, but a few letters were addressed to Martin. He often had things sent to our place when he was traveling. There was one envelope, handwritten, no return address, cream-colored, heavier than the rest. I didn't mean to open it. I was just distracted, tired. My mind was full of medications, appointments, whether Mom would make it through the night. But the flap came undone as I shuffled the letters. That's what I told myself. Inside was a letter folded in half, faint perfume clinging to the paper. The handwriting was messy and romantic in a way that looked like it belonged in a movie, not in Martin Ramsey's world. It began with, "I missed you last night. The bed feels colder without your lies to warm me." I stood there frozen, staring at the page like it had teeth. I flipped it over and kept reading. "You said you'd leave her by summer. You said Amanda wouldn't hate you forever. And now, every time I watch the news and see your smug face shaking hands with CEOs, I wonder, are you shaking hers afterward?" There were dates, mentions of a cabin near Little River, money moved in silence, references to business trips that Amanda had mentioned to me, now with very different context, and then the closer, "I've kept your secrets long enough. If you don't come clean, I will. I love you. But I'm not your shadow anymore." Clarissa. My stomach turned. My hands started to shake. Martin, Amanda's father, the man who paraded himself as the model of manhood, who talked about loyalty, honor, control, was having an affair, possibly for years. I placed the letter back carefully, sealed it, put it in a folder in my study and told myself I'd forget it. It wasn't mine to act on. Amanda and I were already distant. My mom was dying. I didn't need another war. But I couldn't unsee the words, couldn't ignore the way he'd always spoken down to me, the way Amanda's affection had cooled over time, like she too had absorbed his belief that I wasn't enough, that I wasn't man enough. And the more I cared for my mother in her final days, the more bitter I became. Martin hadn't visited, not once, not even a call. And when she died, he didn't send flowers. He just showed up to the funeral. In a pressed suit, drank my whiskey, and insulted my grief like it was performance art. That was the moment something inside me cracked open, not just sadness, something colder. Revenge, maybe. I didn't plan to read the letter at his retirement party, not at first, but then Amanda told me something that lit the match. She said her father was planning to hand over control of his company that night. She was hoping he'd pass it to her. She wanted me to be there, not to speak, just to smile, clap, be quiet. Support the image of the strong family. I said nothing in return. But I walked upstairs that night and pulled the letter from the folder, smoothed out the creases, reread it, and I knew exactly how I'd respond to Martin's lesson on what real men do. We bleed silently. And then we speak when the silence will hurt the most. The moment I stepped off that stage, I knew I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. But I wasn't sorry. Not when I saw Martin's face. Stone still, blood drained, pride crumbling beneath. That perfect suit. Not when I saw the guests whispering, some slipping out early, some avoiding eye contact altogether. And not when Amanda turned to me with eyes wide, blinking like she'd just surfaced from deep water. We didn't talk in the car. She drove, hands clenched on the wheel, breathing shallow, like every word she wanted to say might shatter the windshield. The second we walked through the door, she exploded. "Are you insane?" she shouted. "You humiliated my father in front of everyone. You humiliated me. What were you thinking?" I dropped my keys on the table, looked at her, really looked at her. "I was thinking about how he humiliated me at my mother's funeral," I said, "and every time before that. I was thinking about the letter you asked me to mail without looking at it. That was your handwriting on the envelope, Amanda." Her face drained of color. "You knew," I said. "I didn't know, She stammered, then stopped herself. "I suspected. My mom, she said things. I didn't want to believe it. So instead you pretended and asked me to keep pretending, even after what he said to me, even after everything." Amanda crossed her arms and stared at the floor. "You blew up your relationship with him," she said coldly. "You didn't just light a fire, you nuked the entire family." I took a step closer. My voice was low now. "No," I exposed what was already burning. "I didn't start the fire, Amanda. He did. You just handed him the matches." She didn't respond. We slept in separate rooms that night. The next morning, I woke up to silence. No coffee brewing, no footsteps. Her car was gone. She'd packed a small bag, left a note. "Staying with Mom for a few days. I need space. I don't know what this means for us." I sat with that sentence like it was a verdict. My marriage had already been unraveling for months, but I think a part of me had been clinging to the idea that exposing Martin would somehow snap Amanda out of her father's shadow, that she'd finally see him, see me, but all she saw was the fallout. My phone buzzed constantly. Martin's company board issued a no comment. Some local business blogs picked up the story. The press was careful, respectful even, but the damage was done. Reputations once cracked don't glue back together cleanly. He didn't call. He didn't sue. He didn't show up at my house with fists or fury. That wasn't Martin's style. His punishment was silence, Amanda's too. And as I sat alone at the kitchen table the next night, sipping coffee in the same seat where Martin had once told me to man up, I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my voice in a world that had demanded my silence for too long. I cried for my mother again that night. Not ashamed, not afraid of judgment, but because grief deserves space, and so does truth, even if it burns down everything you thought you needed. 3 days after the party, an envelope arrived at my house. It wasn't official. No lawyer's seal, no threat of litigation. Just a simple white envelope. No return. Address. My name written in soft cursive. I knew who it was from before I opened it. Inside, there was a single page. No perfume this time. No drama. Just clarity. Lucas, I watched the video. I didn't expect you to read it. I wrote that letter. In rage, heartbreak, and desperation. But I never expected anyone to actually do anything about it. Especially not a man in his position. Married into his family. You should know, I never meant to destroy him. I only wanted him to see what he was doing to the people who loved him. I thought maybe guilt would work where love had failed, but you did what no one else ever dared. You held up a mirror. And for the first time in years, Martin couldn't look away. I'm sorry for the damage, but not for the truth. He built a legacy out of stone, and forgot that stone sinks when it's dropped in deep water. Thank you for saying the thing I couldn't. Clarissa sat with that letter for a long time. It didn't give me peace exactly, but it gave me something else. Perspective. Martin hadn't just hurt me, or Amanda. He'd been carving wounds into the people closest to him for years. Clarissa was just one of them, and she'd been silenced the way I had. Not with fists, but with fear, with power, with reputation, with the lie that speaking up would destroy everything. But I'd spoken up, and what was destroyed, maybe, needed to be. I folded the letter, placed it in the same drawer where Martin's original betrayal had lived. The drawer was fuller now, not just with paper, but with answers, and then, 2 days later, the final nail came. Amanda returned home, not alone, but with her mother. They asked to talk. We sat in the living room, awkward and formal, like strangers, pretending to be close. Her mother, Catherine, spoke first. "I'm sorry, Lucas," she said, "for everything. I should have said something years ago. I knew about Clarissa, I knew about the others. Others. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. My husband, he never hit me, but he erased me, slowly, until I didn't even recognize myself in the mirror." Amanda's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. Catherine continued. "I watched you read that letter, and for the first time, I saw someone do what I should have done. And while I can't change the past, I won't protect him anymore." Then she handed me a USB drive. I've been documenting things, for years. I didn't know who I was saving them for. But I think it's you. I held it in my hands like it was a live wire, emails, financial transfers, recorded phone calls, affairs, hidden bank accounts, evidence, the kind that ends empires, not with lawsuits, but with truth. Amanda finally spoke. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I've spent my whole life trying to earn his love, and I never realized what it was costing me." Her voice cracked. "I don't want to lose you, Lucas, but I know I already might have." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw someone at a crossroads. Not a villain, not a victim, just a woman raised in a fortress built on fear. "I don't hate you," I said, "but I can't live under that roof anymore. Even if it's just in your mind." She nodded slowly. No argument, no defense, just truth. I stood, walked to the study, and placed the USB in the same drawer. 3 letters now, 3 confessions, 3 reasons I'd never be silent again. There's something strange about the moment your life burns down. It should feel terrifying, like falling without a net. But for me, it felt like a release, like I'd been holding my breath for years, and I could finally exhale. Amanda moved out the following week. Not with bitterness, not with drama, just a quiet packing of bags and a long, teary goodbye. We didn't fight. We didn't drag it out. We both knew our marriage had been standing on sand long before the letter. The truth just washed away what was left. She left her wedding ring on the table. I didn't pick it up. Instead, I called a locksmith, changed the locks. And then I sat in the middle of the living room floor, surrounded by silence. Not the cold silence of judgment or disapproval, but the peaceful kind. The kind that comes when you no longer need to pretend. Over the next few weeks, I began the slow work of reclaiming my life. I cleared out the guest room that had become storage, turned it into a writing space, a place where I could journal, breathe, think. I reached out to my nonprofit clients again, something I'd put on pause during my mom's illness. They welcomed me back like I'd never left. I planted flowers in her old garden, red ones, Ruth's favorite, and every morning I watered them with hands that no longer shook. Martin's story, meanwhile, was quietly unraveling in the background. Whispers grew into murmurs. A few board members resigned. One major partner pulled out of a deal. No headlines, no courtroom battles. Just a slow, silent crumbling of a reputation once built on stone. Catherine's USB was never made public. I didn't need it to be. The truth had already done its work. It had fractured his world from the inside. And more importantly, it had freed mine. Clarissa sent one final message. A simple email. Thank you for showing the world that silence doesn't equal strength. Some men use their voices to destroy. You used yours to reclaim. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because this was never about revenge anymore. It was about stepping out of the role I'd been assigned. The quiet one, the lesser man, the soft-spoken husband who should just be grateful to belong. I realized I never truly belonged in that world, and I was never meant to. Rebuilding didn't look like fireworks or grand declarations. It looked like grocery shopping without a pit in my stomach, like sleeping through the night, like crying when I missed my mom and not apologizing for it. It looked like living without permission. One afternoon, I received a letter from Amanda, handwritten, careful, sad. She said she was in therapy now, that her mother had moved in with her, that she was beginning to understand the long shadow her father had cast, and how many people had lived in it without ever realizing. She didn't ask to come back. She just said, "Thank you for being the one person brave enough to stop pretending." I folded the letter, put it with the others, not out of sentiment, but because those letters, those words, they were proof that I wasn't wrong for feeling too much. I was human, and if that made me less of a man in Martin's eyes, then thank God I was never his reflection. The last time I visited my mother's grave, it was quiet. Spring had just started to bloom. The grass was finally coming back in, soft and green over the place where her casket lay. A single bench sat a few feet away. I sat there holding a cup of coffee, the same blend she used to brew every morning when I was a kid. For the first time in months, I spoke out loud, just to her. "I get it now, Mom," I whispered. "Why you always told me that tears don't make you weak, they make you real." I had spent most of my adult life surrounded by people who taught me the opposite. Men like Martin, who scoffed at softness, who confused power with silence, control with love, and ego with dignity. But I knew better now. My mother didn't raise a perfect man. She raised an honest one. I stayed at the gravesite for a long time, just watching the wind rustle through the flowers I'd planted. They'd survived winter, just barely, and they were growing again, in new colors this time. Some of the petals were scarred, a little wilted at the edges, but they were alive. So was I. There's a strange peace that comes with standing in the ashes of what used to be your life and realizing you're still breathing, still walking, still you. Only more, wiser, sharper, unwilling to wear masks that don't fit. I used to think strength meant silence. Now I know it means speaking, even when your voice shakes. It means crying when you need to, leaving when it hurts, reading the letter when no one else dares to, standing up to a man like Martin, not to destroy him, but to save yourself. And sometimes it means walking away from love that was never really love at all. Just performance, obligation, fear, dressed up as loyalty. People still talk about that night, the party, the letter, the fallout. Some call it scandal, some call it betrayal. But I call it something else. A beginning. Because from the moment I stood at that mic and read his secrets aloud, I stopped apologizing for my own truth, for my tears, for being the man my mother raised me to be, not Martin's version, mine, the one who chooses honesty over ego, emotion over image, freedom over fear. I stood from the bench, took one last sip of coffee, and placed the empty cup at the edge of her grave. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for showing me what real strength looks like." Then I turned, walked back to the car. No tears this time, just peace, because real men do cry, and that's exactly where their power comes from.